Welcome, brave souls. I am your guide into the realm of the unknown. Here, among these ancient tombstones and whispering trees, we uncover the most intriguing and terrifying stories that will send shivers down your spine. Encounter the supernatural in real life. Each story will transport you to a world where fear reigns and the line between the living and the dead blurs. Are you ready to face your fears? Let the stories begin. In the heart of the city stood a towering apartment building, a relic of the 1970s with an aging exterior that belied the secrets it held within. The residents of this building spoke in hushed tones about strange happenings, but most dismissed them as urban legends, whispered to entertain or frighten the credulous. However, beneath the whispers lay a sinister truth that few dared to acknowledge. For years, children had been going missing, always disappearing from within the building, and always when using the lift alone. It started as a rare occurrence, but as time passed, the frequency increased, spreading a blanket of fear over the inhabitants. The police investigations led nowhere, and the disappearances were eventually chalked up to the city's growing crime rate. But the real culprit was far more horrifying than anyone could imagine. The lift shaft of this building was no ordinary one. Deep within its dark recesses lurked a creature known only as the Lift Fiend. This monster, so named for its preference for the lift shaft, was a grotesque amalgamation of sinew, flesh, and shadows. Its body, a twisted mass of tendrils and gnarled limbs, writhed constantly, as if in perpetual agony. The fiend's heart, visible through its semi-translucent skin, beat with a sickening rhythm, echoing throughout the shaft and sending shivers down the spines of those who listened closely enough. The creature had a face, if one could call it that, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness, and a mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth that seemed too many to fit within its maw. It was not always visible. It seemed to slip in and out of the shadows, appearing when least expected, and vanishing without a trace. One evening, a young boy named Timmy was sent by his mother to fetch something from the ground floor. Timmy was a brave child, always curious and adventurous. His days were filled with reading books about explorers and dreaming of adventures. With a mop of dark hair and bright eyes that sparkled with mischief, he was well liked by everyone in the building. His mother, having heard the stories but never believing them, thought nothing of it. Timmy stepped into the lift, pressing the button for the ground floor. The doors closed and the lift began its descent. As it passed the 6th floor, the lights flickered, a common enough occurrence in the old building. But this time, the lift shuddered and stopped abruptly between floors. Timmy pressed the emergency button, but there was no response. Suddenly, the lights went out completely, plunging the lift into darkness. The temperature dropped sharply, and Timmy could see his breath forming in the air. Panic set in, but before he could react, he heard it, a faint, rhythmic thumping, like a heartbeat, echoing through the shaft. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw something moving outside the lift, within the narrow space between the lift and the shaft walls. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at him. The creature's face pressed against the small window of the lift door, its mouth splitting into a grotesque grin. Timmy screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence. The creature's tendrils slipped through the gaps in the door, reaching for Timmy. He tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The tendrils wrapped around him, pulling him towards the door. As they touched his skin, he felt a cold so intense it burned, and he was drawn closer to the creature's hideous face. The lift fiend did not kill its victims quickly. It relished their fear, feeding off their terror and despair. Timmy felt the creature's icy touch spread through his body, paralyzing him with pain. The tendrils tightened, constricting around his chest, and he felt his heartbeat slow, matching the rhythm of the creature's own. The fiend's eyes bored into his, and he felt his mind slipping away, consumed by the darkness. Timmy's screams were silent in the void, his life force drained by the creature's insatiable hunger. His last thought was of his mother, and then there was nothing. Teamy's disappearance was swift. When the lift finally reached the ground floor, it was empty, save for a small, heart-shaped bruise on the floor where he had stood. His mother searched frantically, but there was no trace of him. The police were called, but they found nothing, and Teamy was added to the growing list of missing children. Days turned into weeks, and the building's residents grew more fearful. Some moved away, unable to bear the thought of their children being next. Others stayed, bound by circumstances or disbelief. But the lift fiend continued its reign of terror, striking seemingly at random, yet always with the same methodical precision. One night, a maintenance worker named Carl was tasked with inspecting the lift shaft. He had heard the stories, but was a skeptic, believing them to be nothing more than tales to scare children. Armed with a flashlight and a toolkit, he descended into the bowels of the building. As he opened the lift doors and peered into the dark shaft, he felt a chill run down his spine. The air was thick with an unnatural cold, and the rhythmic thumping was faint but unmistakable. He dismissed it as the building's old machinery. Yet, as he descended deeper, the sound grew louder, more insistent. Reaching the bottom of the shaft, Carl's flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. He saw movement out of the corner of his eye, but when he turned, there was nothing there. He continued his inspection, unaware that he was being watched. The creature struck without warning. It emerged from the shadows, its tendrils wrapping around Carl and lifting him off the ground. His flashlight fell, casting a beam of light on the monster's hideous face. For a moment, Carl's mind refused to process what he was seeing. The creature's eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence, and its mouth opened in a silent scream. Carl struggled, but the tendrils held him tight, drawing him closer to the pulsating heart. He felt a cold, searing pain as the tendrils tightened around him, and he knew, with a sickening certainty, that he would not escape. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him was the creature's heart, beating faster and faster, in time with his own. The next morning, the lift was out of order, and Carl was reported missing. His tools were found at the bottom of the shaft, along with the flashlight, its beam now lifeless. The heart-shaped bruise on the floor was the only sign of his presence. The residents of the building knew then that the stories were true. The lift fiend was real, and it was hungry. Children were no longer allowed to use the lift alone, and an unspoken rule was established: never take the lift at night, and never, ever acknowledge the heartbeat. But the monster did not rest. It waited patiently for the next child who would defy the rules, for the next skeptic who would venture into its domain. The building stood as a silent sentinel, hiding the horror within its walls as the lift fiend continued its dark vigil, feeding on the fear and the lives of the innocent. And so the legend of the lift fiend grew, a terrifying tale whispered among the residents, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just out of sight, waiting for the unwary and the unbelieving. The building stood silent, a looming testament to the fear that now gripped its residents. The disappearance of Teamy and Carl had left an indelible mark on everyone who lived there, casting long shadows over their lives. The lift fiend's presence was a constant, unspoken dread, and the heart-shaped bruises it left behind were ghastly reminders of its power. Yet, as with all stories of terror, life continued. People moved on, new families moved in, and the memory of the lift fiend began to fade into legend once more. The building seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if the evil that had taken root in its core had finally been sated. However, not far from this cursed building, another dark tale was beginning to unfold. In the heart of the city, nestled between glistening skyscrapers, stood an old high-rise building that seemed untouched by time. Erected in the 1950s, its Art Deco facade exuded an eerie charm, but the locals knew better than to set foot inside. They called it the Elevator of Death, and for good reason. The building had a dark history that sent chills down the spine of anyone who heard it. Long ago, during the building's construction, a young couple, John and Emily, worked on the site. John was a sturdy construction worker, while Emily was a beautiful secretary working in the on-site office. They fell deeply in love, but their relationship was strictly forbidden by the building's ruthless overseer, Mr. Blackwood. He was a man known for his cruelty and iron-fisted control over his workers. Desperate and determined to be together forever, John and Emily made a pact to escape the cruel world by jumping into the elevator shaft. Hand in hand, they leaped, but their love twisted into something dark as they plummeted to their deaths. Now their spirits lingered in the building, transformed into grotesque, vengeful entities. John was tall and gaunt, his face a contorted mask of rage with hollow eyes that burned with a sickly green glow. His once strong hands were now skeletal claws, dripping with the blood of his victims. Emily, once beautiful, now had a skeletal frame, her long black hair matted with blood and her eyes weeping crimson tears. Her mouth was a permanent, gaping maw that seemed to scream silently into the void. Together they sought to exact revenge on anyone who dared to enter their domain. Many had fallen prey to the cursed elevator. Mark, a janitor, was the first. One night, as he cleaned the building, the elevator doors opened silently. Curiosity drew him inside. As the doors closed, the elevator lights flickered, and John's spirit appeared, grabbing Mark's head and smashing it against the mirrored walls. Blood splattered everywhere as Emily's spirit emerged, tearing at his flesh with her bony fingers, until he was nothing more than a lifeless, bloody heap. Next was Sarah, a real estate agent trying to sell the building. She stepped into the elevator, unaware of the danger. Suddenly, the elevator stopped, and the lights went out. Panicked, she pressed the emergency button, but it was too late. John and Emily materialized, their ghastly forms glowing in the dark. John grabbed her by the throat, lifting her off the ground, while Emily clawed at her chest, ripping out her heart in a gruesome display of blood and gore. Then there was Peter, a thrill-seeking teenager dared by his friends to spend a night in the haunted building. Armed with only his phone and a flashlight, he entered the building with a mix of excitement and trepidation. As he explored the dark, decaying hallways, he heard whispers and footsteps that weren't his own. Determined to prove his bravery, he stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and he felt a cold, clammy hand on his shoulder. He spun around, but there was nothing there. Suddenly, the elevator plummeted, and the lights went out. John and Emily appeared, their faces twisted with malevolent glee. They tore into Peter with savage fury, his screams echoing in the empty building until they were abruptly cut off. Enter Alex, a skeptical urban explorer with a fascination for debunking supernatural myths. He had heard the stories of the elevator of death and was determined to prove them false. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a digital recorder, he ventured into the building, determined to capture evidence that would debunk the legend once and for all. As he walked through the dimly lit corridors, a chill ran down his spine, but he shook it off. He approached the elevator, the centerpiece of the building's dark history. The elevator doors creaked open, inviting him in. Alex hesitated but stepped inside, his heart pounding. As the doors closed, the temperature dropped, and his breath became visible. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows. Suddenly, the elevator stopped between floors, and the lights went out completely. Alex's flashlight flickered to life, revealing John and Emily's spirits looming before him. Their hollow eyes bore into his soul, and he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. John's spirit lunged at him, but Alex dodged, his survival instincts kicking in. He swung his flashlight, connecting with John's head, causing the spirit to wail in agony. Desperate to escape, Alex fumbled with his camera, trying to capture evidence. He snapped a photo, and the flash illuminated the elevator. To his horror, he saw not just John and Emily, but the faces of all their victims, twisted in eternal torment. The spirits reached for him, their ghastly hands tearing at his clothes, trying to drag him into the darkness. In a moment of clarity, Alex remembered an old urban legend he had read about the building. The only way to banish the spirits was to reunite them with their earthly remains. He frantically searched the elevator, finding a hidden panel behind which were the bones of John and Emily, placed there by the overseer who had tried to hide their deaths. With trembling hands, Alex gathered the bones and whispered a prayer, hoping to set the spirits free. The elevator shook violently, and the spirits screamed in rage. Just as they were about to overtake him, a bright light engulfed the elevator. John and Emily's spirits began to dissolve, their faces softening from rage to peace. The elevator doors opened and Alex stumbled out, covered in blood but alive. The building seemed to sigh, its oppressive aura lifting. He had survived, and as he looked back at the now silent elevator, he knew the spirits were finally at rest. Alex's story spread and the building was eventually torn down. But the legend of the elevator of death lived on, a chilling reminder of the vengeful spirits that once haunted its halls. And those who heard the tale couldn't help but feel a shiver down their spine, wondering if the spirits might one day return. The next morning, Alex found himself back in his apartment, still shaken by the previous night's events. He looked at the photos and videos he had captured, his hands trembling. The images were blurry and dark, but the faces of John and Emily were unmistakable. He uploaded the files to his computer, determined to share his story with the world. As he typed out his experiences, strange things began to happen. The lights flickered, and his computer screen distorted, showing flashes of the spirits' faces. He tried to ignore it, chalking it up to stress and exhaustion, but a sense of unease settled over him. Finally, after hours of work, he hit publish and sent his story into the digital ether. Days passed, and the response was overwhelming. People were fascinated and horrified by Alex's tale, and soon the story of the elevator of death went viral. Paranormal enthusiasts and skeptics alike debated its authenticity, but one thing was clear. The building's dark history had captured the public's imagination. One evening, as Alex reviewed the comments on his post, he noticed a message from an anonymous user. It read, "You think it's over? It's just the beginning." A chill ran down his spine, and he quickly deleted the comment, trying to brush it off as a prank. But that night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. His dreams were plagued by nightmares of John and Emily, their faces twisted with rage and sorrow. He saw himself trapped in the elevator, the walls closing in as the spirits clawed at him. He woke up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding. The room was dark, but he felt a presence, a cold, malevolent energy that made his skin crawl. Determined not to let fear consume him, Alex decided to confront whatever was haunting him. He grabbed his flashlight and camera, just as he had in the building, and began to search his apartment. As he moved from room to room, he heard whispers, faint and indistinct, growing louder with each step. He reached his bathroom and saw the mirror fogging up, despite the cold air. Suddenly, words appeared on the mirror, written in blood. "You can't escape us." Alex stumbled back, his heart racing. He snapped a photo, but the camera malfunctioned, the screen flickering before going black. Panic set in, and he ran to his living room, only to find the lights flickering and his electronics turning on and off. In the midst of the chaos, the temperature dropped, and Alex's breath became visible. He felt a cold hand on his shoulder and spun around, but there was nothing there. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the spirits were trying to communicate. He realized that he had to do something, anything to rid himself of their presence. He remembered the prayer he had used to banish the spirits in the building and began to recite it, his voice trembling. The lights flickered more violently, and the whispers turned to screams. The room shook, and Alex felt as though he was being pulled into another dimension. Just as he thought he couldn't take any more, everything went still. The lights stabilized and the room was silent. Alex looked around, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The oppressive energy had lifted, but he knew it was only a temporary reprieve. He needed to find a permanent solution, or the spirits would continue to torment him. The next day, Alex sought out a renowned paranormal investigator named Dr. Eleanor Bishop. She had a reputation for dealing with malevolent entities and had written several books on the subject. Alex explained his situation, showing her the evidence he had gathered. Dr. Bishop listened intently, her expression grave. "The spirits are bound to you because you disturbed their resting place," she explained. "They are seeking vengeance for their untimely deaths and the pain they endured. We must find a way to help them move on, or they will continue to haunt you." Together, they devised a plan. They would return to the site of the building, now a vacant lot, and perform a ritual to cleanse the area and release the spirits. Alex was hesitant, but he knew he had no other choice. As night fell, they arrived at the empty lot. The moon cast an eerie glow over the rubble, and a cold wind whipped through the air. Dr. Bishop set up a circle of candles and placed the bones of John and Emily in the center. She began to chant in a language Alex didn't understand, her voice rising and falling with the wind. Suddenly, the air grew thick with energy, and the spirits of John and Emily appeared, their faces twisted with rage. They lunged at Alex, but an invisible barrier held them back. Dr. Bishop continued to chant, her voice unwavering. The spirits screamed and writhed, their forms flickering like a dying flame. Slowly, their expressions softened, and they began to fade. As they disappeared, a sense of peace settled over the lot. The wind died down, and the temperature returned to normal. Dr. Bishop finished the ritual and turned to Alex. "It's done," she said. "They are finally at rest." Alex felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He thanked Dr. Bishop and left the lot, feeling a sense of closure. The spirits were gone, and he could finally move on with his life. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching him. He glanced back at the lot, now just an empty space in the bustling city. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow move, but when he looked closer, there was nothing there. With a sigh, Alex turned and continued on his way, hoping that the horrors of the elevator of death were truly behind him. But deep down, he knew that some things could never be forgotten, and the memory of that cursed building would haunt him forever. So, brave souls, our journey in the shadows is coming to an end for tonight. We hope that these stories have stirred your imagination and given you goosebumps. Remember, the world is full of secrets waiting to be discovered, and the line between reality and the supernatural is thinner than you might think. If you enjoyed today's stories and want to hear more creepy and unexplained, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you will be the first to know about new stories of horror and intrigue. Click on the bell icon so you don't miss a single creepy story. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, some doors are better left unopened.